Sigmund Freud famously wrote that the person who first flung a word of abuse at their enemy instead of an arrow was the founder of civilization. The word, he noted, became the substitute for the deed. Since then, humanity has perfected the art of civilized disagreement. I kid, of course. The arrows we fling nowadays tend to be digital. Spotting, deflecting, or catching them requires a refined skill set. Thankfully, in 2008, author Paul Graham attempted to put contemporary disagreement into perspective by classifying its most common forms. Graham's Hierarchy of Disagreement was born. Let's explore how to argue like a true expert and what forms of disagreements we should rather avoid. What is Graham's Hierarchy of Disagreement? Graham's Hierarchy of Disagreement is an informal ranking of 7 common strategies of dissent, from low-quality forms of disagreement to the highest quality ones. It was developed by Paul Graham in his essay, How to Disagree. Paul's reasoning for writing the piece was pretty straightforward. The web made the writer-reader relationship more interactive, he thought. As a result, disagreement by way of the written word in the form of online comments surged. While ideas being challenged was a wonderful thing, we might want to develop a nuanced understanding of what quality disagreement looks like. Let's revisit his hierarchy, expanding its scope to the spoken word. We'll look at each of the 7 stages individually and reflect on them holistically in the end. Name-calling. The lowest form of disagreement, and probably also the most common. As Freud correctly observed, abusive language is a more civilized way of disagreement than violence. Still sounds terrible, but let's be honest, we're all doing it. This is why I probably won't have to give an example. Name-calling is a quick and easy way to dismiss everything about an argument in one go. What was said, how it was said, and most importantly, that ignorant blockhead who said it. Today, it even comes in the form of GIFs and memes. Despite its common nature, name-calling can still take us by surprise, especially when it's wrapped in sophisticated language. As Graham points out, the author is a self-important dilettante, falls into the name-calling category too. Yet it says nothing about the validity of someone's claim. Technically, I can be a self-important dilettante and still be correct. Regardless, I think there's some merit to name-calling, apart from it not being an arrow. If used in a tongue-in-cheek manner or for humorous effect, it can be a legitimate way to make a point. With one important caveat, it should be obvious to the audience that you know how to argue and how to behave yourself. If you're Richard Dawkins, you can get away with indirectly telling Neil deGrasse Tyson to f off and make everyone laugh in the process. When reacting to name-calling, I think it's worth seeing it as a form of disagreement, albeit an emotionally loaded one. The breaking of conventions may signal frustration or helplessness. There's really no point in launching into a long-winded rebuttal that one is in fact not an asshat. Labeling the negative is a better strategy. Sounds like you're really passionate about this topic, could elicit substance you can actually work with. Ad hominem. Attacks the characteristics or authority of the writer without addressing the substance of the argument. An ad hominem feels like it could also belong in Category 1 of Graham's Hierarchy of Disagreement, but it's a bit more sophisticated attack on your credibility. As Mill's trident suggests, when it comes to the argument itself, it can only be wrong, partially correct, or 100% accurate. But surely, if we're deemed not competent enough or morally reprehensible, it means our argument can be conveniently ignored. It's quite reminiscent of the legal strategy to discredit the integrity and reliability of a witness to dismiss his or her testimony. Although this form of disagreement feels insincere, I think Graham is right in not entirely dismissing it. His example is that of a senator being in favor of increasing the salaries of parliamentarians. Of course, he would say that. He's a senator, is a response akin to a mental shortcut that has a point. But how exactly? Let's untangle this a bit further. It looks like the missing links between a speaker's characteristics or authority and the substance of a claim are bias and competence. The senator is clearly biased when it comes to his own salary, so it has some bearing on the validity of his argument. He may have fallen into an intuitive trap, rendering his claim unsound. A similar attack on one's authority denies the writer or speaker the competence to put together a valid point. Oddly enough, the proof of competence can be found in the argument itself, which is conveniently ignored. Today, there seem to be ever more metrics by which characteristics and authority are judged. Group identity and presumed political affiliation. What someone looks like. What they don't look like. With whom they happen to share a stage in the past. The number of likes and shares, who they follow or who follows them. In short, any conveniently unfavorable label. When it comes to assessing if a claim makes any sense, those metrics don't get us too far. The same goes for the number of Twitter followers. But of course, I would say that. I only have a few. If we were to steelman the ad hominem attack, we could see it as a comment on the likelihood of a claim having substance. That is how much weight it should be given. It would be impractical to divorce an argument from the speaker or writer entirely. Just imagine a claim about rocket science being tweeted by Elon Musk, or yours truly. Even though disagreements cannot be solved by comparing characteristics or weighing up credentials alone, they have a place when used in good faith. Really, if a writer's expertise and standing are so questionable, it should be a breeze to debunk their arguments. So, what can you do about it? Perhaps just lean back and internalize an aphorism by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. You never win an argument until they attack your person. Responding to tone criticizes the tone of the writing without addressing the substance of the argument. We're making our way further up the pyramid. The air is getting a bit thinner, and we're now talking about the content of what was being written or said. Kind of. Because at this level, disagreement is only about how an argument was conveyed. There's a dimension of tone to our earlier name-calling example, the one involving Dawkins and deGrasse Tyson. The astrophysicist criticizes the evolutionary biologist for his rather uncompromising promotion of atheism and science. Dawkins responds with a quote that he attributes to an unnamed former editor of the New Scientist magazine. Science is interesting, and if you don't agree, you can f off. At level DH2 of Graham's Hierarchy of Disagreement, we would ignore Dawkins' underlying point entirely and spend all our energy on rebuking the man for the harsh, authoritarian, and combative tone of his words. Of course, this was all said in good humor, though it's an extreme example of a phenomenon with which we're probably all too familiar. Whether we like it or not, tone invariably plays a role in both written and spoken language. Is it friendly and curious, or hostile and condescending, personal or distanced? Is the tone implied towards the audience or the subject? Tone carries meaning and can change a sentence considerably. Just think of irony or sarcasm. Paul is correct in saying that tone is hard to judge and eventually in the ear of the beholder. Whatever the perceived meaning of an argument is, it's usually more productive to prioritize the substance than to engage in a meta-argument about tone. With the exception of asking for clarification, I'd say. The antidote to this form of disagreement is similar to the previous ones. Bad faith actors can always find ways to respond to tone. If they never circle back to your argument, it may have just been a distraction for their lack of quality disagreement. So, label the negative and probe for substance. Contradiction states the opposing case with little or no supporting evidence. I'd be committing a crime if I didn't reference Monty Python's argument clinic at this point. Not sure what Paul Graham was thinking. As early as 1976, John Cleese and Michael Palin opined. Palin, argument is an intellectual process. Contradiction is just the automatic gainsaying of anything the other person says. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. Though it ranks somewhat in the middle of Graham's hierarchy of disagreement, it's the first level that addresses the actual substance of a claim. Well, poorly. If we go with the sexy method, an argument consists of a statement, an explanation, and an illustration. That is, supporting evidence. Contradiction is nothing more than a low-resolution counterclaim that rejects an argument in its entirety. However, as Graham points out, it is not without merit. It may be a good opener to establish your opposition to a statement you consider outlandish or obviously untrue. In order to address the substance of an argument, there also has to be substance to begin with. If there's none, Christopher Hitchens' dictum may apply. What can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. In a best-case scenario, contradiction is enough for the other party to concede your point. In a slightly less good scenario, you prompt your counterpart to provide more supporting evidence. That'll give you something to work with. Alternatively, you'll be trapped in an automatic gainsaying forever. On a more serious note, the antidote to mere contradiction is the classic why. This is annoyingly illustrated by the why game. The why game is an underrated debating activity that will lead you to appreciate the Munchausen trilemma, a thought experiment about the impossibility of proving the truth. If you prefer to be less confrontational, a "what caused you to think that" will do. Even less confrontational, mirroring what the other person said with a curious and questioning tone followed by a pause should prompt them to expand on their idea. Counter-argument. Contradicts and then backs it up with reasoning and/or supporting evidence. We've now reached the first form of convincing disagreement according to Graham's hierarchy of disagreement. Hooray! Unfortunately, a counter-argument tends only to give us the illusion of constructive objection. No doubt, it's an improvement over level 3. But there's the danger of missing the point of the original argument and ending up straw-manning each other. Worst case, the counter-argument doesn't directly relate to the original argument. Peanut butter is healthy because it tastes fantastic can be countered with, "No, because my cat is allergic to it. Here's its health record." But that doesn't get to the core of the matter. The same is true for the provision of a link as a counter-argument. It's too unspecific and too unrelated to the original claim to deserve a higher rank. Counter-arguments work when everyone's paying attention to what was being said or written, when both sides are willing to do the legwork themselves by reflecting on how a counter-argument might disprove their point of view. It also has a place in debate when you want to pivot to a whole new line of argument. Don't get me wrong. I love to focus on self-righteously hammering my own points home as much as the next person. It's just not quality disagreement. If you realize you're arguing past each other and you don't want to merely agree to disagree, start by leveling up to DH5. Refutation. Finds the mistake and then explains why it's mistaken using quotes. As Graham points out, refutation is the highest form of disagreement. That's because it's difficult, which is why it's scarce. To pull it off, you have to master the art of dissecting an argument and establishing why parts of it might be flawed. It helps to have a conceptualization of what an argument consists of. If we go with the sexy method again, you'd be analyzing if the statement has flaws, whether the explanation of it is lacking, or if supporting evidence does not hold up. Peanut butter is healthy because it tastes fantastic. This has been shown in a 2018 study, gives us plenty of aspects to refute. The alleged correlation between health and taste, for example, or the sample size and methodology of the study. The prerequisite for refutation, however, is your ability to pay close attention to what's being written or said for that matter. Paul is right, again, in saying that whatever you quote has to match with what you're refuting. Otherwise, you run the risk of straw-manning your counterpart, which essentially sets you back to level 4 or lower. I'd add a related pitfall. Be careful not to lose yourself in pointing out faulty logic and reasoning for its own sake. This kind of nitpickery rarely advances a debate or gets anyone closer to the truth. It can also feel more like a clandestine ad hominem or name-calling exercise. So don't get carried away if you like this kind of stuff. Note to self. Unlike most of the earlier levels, being confronted with a refutation can be a welcoming experience. Done right, it truly tests your ideas and encourages you to think through and refine your position. That being said, refuting parts of an argument still doesn't get you all the way to the top of the pyramid. Refuting the central point. Explicitly refutes the central point. Here we are at the top of Graham's hierarchy of disagreement. We're pretty much alone up here. We're still in the realm of refutation, but instead of refuting aspects, we're identifying and demolishing the central point of an argument. Similar to DH5, this requires skills that can be practiced with more advanced debate games. Paying attention to what was being said, repeating it back to the speaker until he or she agrees with your characterization of the argument, and then refuting the central point. The highest form of disagreement comes with its own difficulties. It's hard to refute a central point when the other side doesn't have one. Additionally, refuting a single argument may lead to winning the battle, but it's usually only one piece of a set of claims needed to establish a proposition. However, if you're facing a formidable opponent who knows how to disagree, you have a guaranteed constructive intellectual sparring session on your hands. In fact, this level of disagreement is so vital in solving problems and discovering the truth that it's often generated somewhat artificially if it doesn't come naturally. Finally, what can you do if your carefully crafted central point is taken apart? Perhaps just concede that you were wrong. Be grateful for learning something new and get out of your head. Take up a new hobby, maybe. I hear archery is quite good for improving your patience, focus, and confidence. The art of intellectual sparring lies in your ability to use the entire range of Graham's hierarchy of disagreement. It involves understanding your counterpart's arguments and crafting your own effectively. Disagreement encompasses more than just reasoning and logic. It's also about people's emotions, pace, timing, wit, and collaboration. It addresses the substance of an argument while considering how something was said, the person who said it, and the reasoning behind it. To be effective, you should adapt to your counterpart and the dynamics of the exchange. Probing an argument from all angles requires proficiency at every level of disagreement, even if you might not use them all. Your ultimate goal is to reach DH6, where you understand each other's central points and the underlying reasons for your differing perspectives. And who says you can't have a bit of banter along the way?